It was the night of October 6, 2025, when police in Harvard, Illinois made a shocking discovery. Inside a car parked on the side of the road, they found Rachel and Brandon Dumovich, a young married couple, both shot dead. Their car's hazard lights were still blinking, lighting up the dark road like a silent cry for help. They were just days away from celebrating their first wedding anniversary. No one knows what really happened that night. There was a gun inside the car, but no witnesses, no suspects, and no clear answers. Did someone kill them? Or did something else happen between the two lovers? A happy love story had suddenly turned into a chilling mystery, and the whole town was left asking one question. What really happened to Rachel and Brandon on that lonely road? If you find this story compelling, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss part 2 when new facts emerge. They called themselves middle school sweethearts. Their wedding page, their social feeds, and the friends who remember them carried the same notes. Childhood connection, easy laughter, a relationship that matured into a marriage on October Day in 2024. Rachel Dumovich was 29. She carried a degree in business administration, loved travel, and, by all remembrances, brought energy and laughter to every room. Brandon Dumovich was 30, kind and steady, the kind of partner who'd been at her side since adolescence. Together they were ordinary in the most human way. They shared hopes, routines, plans for anniversaries, and dreams for travel. A photo from their honeymoon in Santorini spoke in the universal language of newlywed joy. Sunsets, blue roofs, hands clasped in a foreign light. That image would haunt the weeks that followed. The couple married October 12, 2024. Friends and family celebrated in a way that mixed nostalgia with anticipation. Here were two people whose story had started young and who had chosen, publicly and proudly, to continue together into adulthood. If there was a narrative to anchor the tragedy, it was that of two lives growing together, intertwined by first crushes, prom seasons, and eventually vows. The depth of that shared history would render their deaths all the more difficult for their community to process. On the night of October 6, 2025, at approximately 11:45 p.m., an officer patrolling in Harvard noticed a vehicle that appeared to be disabled. Its hazard lights were activated, a small, familiar signal that something was wrong. What the officer found inside that car would soon make headlines nationwide. Rachel in the driver's seat and Brandon in the passenger seat, both unresponsive. Each had sustained a single gunshot wound. A firearm was recovered inside the vehicle. Within hours, the McHenry County Coroner's Office had been called. Local law enforcement established a perimeter and alerted nearby residents. In the early confusion, officials reassured the public there was no continuing threat, calling the incident isolated. The images of flashing emergency lights, the dull ring of police tape, and the cluster of worried faces outside neighbors' homes became the backdrop for a story that would spread across social networks and newsrooms. Hazard lights blinking, engine perhaps still warm. Those small details are what keep investigators and storytellers awake. When two people are discovered in a parked car with gunshot wounds, a limited set of possibilities typically moves to the top of any investigator's list. Homicide, suicide, or murder-suicide. Each possibility carries its own set of forensic footprints, and each leave the family and public searching for meaning. Was there anyone else present that night? Were there indications of a struggle? Had the couple been arguing, distressed, or outwardly showing signs of crisis? What did their recent messages, posts, texts, images reveal, if anything? Social media offered a poignant, if cryptic, breadcrumb. A recent post from Rachel reminiscing about sunsets in Greece, a longing to return. It's a small human detail that reminds us these are more than headlines. These were people who planned vacations, who wanted anniversaries in years ahead. Investigators moved carefully. They collected the firearm. They interviewed neighbors. They sought any surveillance video from nearby businesses or residences that might capture the car's arrival or departure or another vehicle in the area. Autopsies and toxicology testing were ordered, and while law enforcement stated there was no threat to the broader public, they also declined to speak definitively about motive or manner until facts could be established. I end tragedies like this. Speculation rushes in to fill the void left by the unknown. On social media, friends and strangers alike asked the questions the police could not yet answer. Were the shots self-inflicted? Was there a third party? Why would a couple stop on Route 14 and leave their hazard lights on? For some, the recovered gun in the vehicle made the pathway to certain conclusions seem more direct. For others, the presence of a gun did not preclude foul play by an outside actor. The police publicly noted that a murder-suicide was one scenario they were considering, but that no final determination had been made. That measured language did little to stem rumors. Instead, it became a flashpoint in conversations about mental health, gun safety, and the way tragedy is narrated in the press. Friends and acquaintances mourning online drifted between grief and defensive recollection, painting a picture of two people who loved one another and had dreams immediately undercut by the impossible. Behind every investigative detail are family members who will never again hear a voice on the other end of the phone or find the familiar outline of a loved one's body sleeping soundly. Obituaries and remembrances began to appear. Portraits of two people remembered separately in their own right. Rachel, generous and spirited. Brandon, compassionate and loyal. Funeral services were announced. The community, stitched together by school hallways and shared neighborhoods, gathered to remember the cadence of ordinary days with people who now existed only in memory. There is a particular cruelty to a life interrupted so early. First anniversaries unpaid, family plans unfulfilled, beds that remain untouched. For the parents and friends who knew their inside jokes, the grief was specific and sharp. Attendance at memorials and vigils doubled as a public expression of disbelief, and a private attempt to anchor pain to ritual. If you're finding this difficult to listen to, please take care of yourself. If you or someone you love is in crisis, reach out to local emergency services or a trusted support line. The forensic work in any case like this is methodical. Ballistics tests on the recovered firearm and the bullets recovered during autopsy would tell investigators whether the shots matched the gun in the vehicle. Gunshot residue tests could identify who may have discharged a firearm, and DNA swabs could confirm handling. Forensic pathologists would examine trajectories, angles, and distance to try to reconstruct the positions of each person at the moment of the shooting. Police canvassed the area for witnesses and reviewed surveillance footage from the stretch of Route 14 near Division and Burbank Streets. They searched for any sign that another vehicle had been present or that someone else had approached the car. Interviews with friends and family looked at the couple's recent behavior. Were there stresses at work? Financial troubles? Health problems? The broader context, the mundane pressures of life, can sometimes hint at a motive or explain a sudden collapse into violence or desperation. But sometimes the evidence stubbornly refuses to yield a single story. Cases classified as possible murder-suicide in the early days can take months of digging before authorities feel confident to assign a manner of death. Toxicology results take weeks. Ballistics comparisons and trace evidence require time and patience. Families are left in a suspended state, grieving, but uncertain the narrative that will become the official truth. When a tragedy touches a small community and the story migrates to national outlets, the nature of coverage matters. Responsible reporting balances the public's right to know with the privacy and dignity of those affected. In the days after Rachel and Brandon were found, local outlets provided details from official statements. Larger outlets amplified the story, and social feeds filled with speculation. In every headline, there is a choice: to humanize or to sensationalize that a true crime storyteller has responsibilities too. The temptation to dramatize can conflict with the duty to handle victims and their families with respect. When crafting narratives about real people, particularly those who cannot speak for themselves, forethought on tone, accuracy, and the impact on grieving relatives is required. For that reason, we avoid filling spaces between facts with reckless assumptions. Instead, we present what is known, what is possible, and what remains unknown, that if you have ever lost someone suddenly, you understand the tug of personal artifacts. Photos, clothing, wedding vows, everyday items become vessels of memory. For Rachel and Brandon, their wedding page, social media photos, and messages became a public archive of a private life. In one photo, Rachel laughter-filled, eyes squinting against a Greek sunset. In another, Brandon beside her, arm across a shoulder, steady in content. These images, shared by friends and family, are not evidence in a forensic sense, but they are evidence of the lives that were lived, ordinary and indelible. Community members collected candlelight vigils and online memorials. Strangers, moved by the couple's story of childhood commitment, left notes and flowers. In many ways, that grassroots mourning is the social system's way of refusing to let two people be anonymized by tragedy. The couple's names, stories, and faces would be carried forward by those who love them. This case inevitably intersects with larger debates that frequently surface after deaths involving firearms, questions about safe storage, access, and mental health support. While law enforcement had not released a final manner of death, the mere presence of a gun in a vehicle raised broader concerns about the decisions individuals make with firearms and the tragic consequences when those decisions intersect with emotional crises. Mental health advocates urge compassion and systemic action. Better access to care, less stigma around asking for help, and more community-level resources. Others focus on the practical, secure storage and education around firearms. Regardless of the ultimate determinations in this case, the public conversation would tilt, once again, toward how to prevent such losses in the future as officials continued their work. Family statements and obituaries began to appear, painting two separate portraits. Those tributes read like character sketches you tend to find in small-town obituaries. Interests, professions, familial roles, and the echoes of childhood friends who remained. One account described Rachel as someone who lit up rooms and was always ready with a joke. Another remembered Brandon as compassionate and dependable. The publication of obituaries does not itself solve the questions. Instead, it is the first step in the ritual of closure that communities use to reweave themselves. Funerals, memorial donations, and shared stories become ways to name grief and to keep a presence of the lost among the living. As we narrate the weeks that followed the discovery on Route 14, certain unknowns persisted. For example, the final autopsy and toxicology results. These are vital for determining whether substances played a role, ballistics and gunshot residue analyses, the specifics of angles, distances, and whether bullet trajectories match handling by a single shooter. Any surveillance or witness testimony that might corroborate arrival times or the presence of another vehicle. Private communications. Texts or emails that might reveal a last conversation, a plea for help, or an argument. These are often sensitive and are not released to the public. Without these pieces, media narratives must be cautious. For families and friends, the lack of definite answers can feel like an extra layer of cruelty. We are left with a portrait assembled from fragments, photos, memories, official statements, and the hard edges of forensic fact yet to be revealed. Small towns and close-knit circles require a shared language for grief. Harvard residents, former classmates, and neighbors in Sharon, Wisconsin, found that language in shared remembrances. Vigils allowed people to process shock collectively. Friends shared anecdotes online, letting others see the couple not just as victims of an unnamed tragedy, but as a pair of human beings who once argued about breakfast choices or laughed at inside jokes. The collective outpouring extended to practical support for families, fundraisers to help with funeral expenses, meals for parents, and offers to handle errands. In times of loss, small acts of service become the scaffolding that allows raw grief to be held. Telling true crime stories involves an ethical balancing act, the public's appetite for detail versus a family's right to privacy. We've all seen the worst outcomes of sensational reporting, misidentified suspects, premature judgments, and irreversible harms. That history urges restraint. For that reason, this script avoids gratuitous detail and speculation. We will not engage in rumor. Instead, we center the facts that law enforcement has publicly offered, the remembrances from family and friends, and the measured possibilities investigators noted. Let's be clear about what the publicly known evidence shows. 2 occupants discovered in a parked vehicle with hazard lights on. Each suffered a single gunshot wound. A firearm was recovered inside the vehicle. Authorities have said the incident appears isolated and that there is no continuing public threat. Investigators stated that A. Murder-suicide is a potential scenario, but that a final determination had not been made. What it does not tell us, and cannot, yet, are the precise events that led to the shots, the intentions behind them, and whether there were other actors. Those are the gaps the investigation seeks to fill. One of the cruelest ironies in the story is the timing. A wedding anniversary, a symbol of commitment, looming only days ahead. Anniversaries are markers of continuity. Promises kept, memories retraced. To find a couple so recently married in a scene of such abrupt finality is to confront the fragile boundary between expectation and the unknowable. Whether the couple had plans for a second honeymoon, for a home, for family, those plans now remain forever paused. The grief that follows is not only for their lives, but for all that would never be. If you want to help in cases like this, consider concrete actions that support healing. Donate to verified family support funds if one is established. Attend vigils or memorial events respectfully, and avoid spreading unconfirmed details on social media. The worst harm often comes from amplification of rumor. Allow investigators to do their work, and allow families space to grieve. If you appreciate careful, respectful, true crime storytelling, please like, subscribe, and share. Your engagement helps support ongoing reporting and keeps this family story in the public eye until the facts are known. Sadly, cases involving couples found dead together in cars are not singular in American news. Across decades, investigators have encountered scenes that, superficially similar, ultimately reveal vastly different stories. Some are homicides, some suicides, some accidental shootings, and others are violent acts committed by third parties. Each case requires rigorous work, witness interviews, forensic reconstructions, and scientific testing. The pattern is not deterministic. Each story must be judged on evidence, not resemblance to past tragedies. When we say a death appears isolated, we must understand the measured choice of words. Law enforcement uses this phrasing to reassure the public that there is no reason to fear for safety, while acknowledging that the specific factors in the case may still point to involvement by someone not yet identified. It's an invitation to proceed cautiously, a reminder that certainty in complex forensic matters requires time. For families, the waiting is the cruelest stretch. Autopsy results, ballistics, toxicology. These are the procedural pillars of a complete story. When those pillars are in place, investigators can determine the manner of death, which then allows communities, journalists, and loved ones to move from raw confusion to something approaching closure. Until then, the story lives in a liminal state, public enough to be mourned broadly, private enough to be unsettled by rumor. Our role in telling it is to hold those tensions without turning them into spectacle. In the weeks and months that follow, we expect more facts to emerge. Perhaps the coroner's office will release a final report. Perhaps surveillance footage will provide a missing sequence. Perhaps private messages will remain forever private. Whatever the case, the simplest, most reliable truth remains. Two people who began their lives together in middle school, who married in October, and who shared a small trove of memories with family and friends, are gone. We can remember their faces, their laughter, the small acts that made them who they were. We can hold their story without rushing to a moral conclusion or a neat narrative tidy enough to fit a headline. Investigations of this kind are slow by necessity. They are also an attempt to create justice where possible and truth where certainty is required. For those who loved Rachel and Brandon, the hope is for answers that fit the facts, but also, and perhaps more importantly, for time, space, and empathy to grieve. If this story has moved you, consider how your own community supports people in crisis. Reach out to friends who might be isolating. Be attentive to the signs that someone may need help. In times of grief and confusion, we are, ultimately, each other's keepers. If you want more in-depth coverage, updates as the investigation unfolds, interviews with family and investigators, and a careful look at the forensic evidence, subscribe and turn on notifications. We will bring you part 2 when official reports are released, and we will continue to treat this story with the care it deserves.